So welcome once again. Um, this is going to be a webinar for about an hour, as I said, once again on achieving peak efficiencies in hospitality accounting using hyper automation. We will be joined by two veteran speakers to showcase the value of hyper automation that brings that it brings to hospitality. But first up, thank you for the time that you will be spending on this webinar. We truly appreciate it. Few housekeeping items to take note of today. We will be recording the sessions, and also we will send the slides and the recording in the next 24 hours. Please feel free to email your questions, thoughts, suggestions, and more importantly, your inquiries to us after the webinar. And during the session, please go ahead with your questions. You could post it via chat, and we will try to answer as many questions as possible by the end of the webinar. We would like to request you to keep distractions at bay for the next 1 hour, because this is going to be an interesting and informative session on hyperautomation. And we would also have a couple of polls coming your way, so we certainly would like to have your active participation. With that, let me tell you, 4 years back, a journey began to democratize artificial intelligence across industries and varying sizes of enterprises. Rapid Acceleration Partners has worked across multiple industries and clients and have helped them save more than 80% on manual effort and improve operational efficiencies. And the industry has taken note of our involvement in the evolution of hyperautomation. Analytics Digital named us the most valuable transformation company in 2020. CIO Review named Rapid Acceleration Partners as one of the top 10 global RPA companies. Rapid Acceleration Partners today has also partnered with CognitGo on this mission to help enterprises across industries achieve peak efficiencies with accelerated intelligent process automation. Today in the session, we will have two speakers who are industry veterans in their own right. Raghu Ramamurthy, Raghu as he is fondly called, is the founder CEO of Rapid Acceleration Partners, or RAP as we call it, and he comes with years of experience in the automation space. Our other partner, Augustin Gohil, is the founder CEO of CognitGo, who is someone who has dedicated his career to digital transformation of enterprises. So let us stay tuned and today learn how you can achieve up to 80% of process efficiencies, save operational costs, and achieve scalability, all while you continue to use your existing infrastructure and investment. We will now start with a quick poll. Please take 30 seconds to make your choice. And once we have the poll results in, Augustin will dive straight into the presentation. And here comes your question. Which of these challenges do you think contributes to the most to process inefficiencies? Manual and repetitive tasks, rectifying errors, manual errors, data collection and reporting, or unskilled, untrained manpower?
Hello, good morning, everyone. Let me introduce myself. I'm Augustine, and while we're waiting for this poll to take place, I just wanted to welcome everyone. Also, wish our Irish friends happy St. Paddy's Day. And for the rest of us that are Irish at heart, I know we'll be enjoying the corned beef and cabbage and maybe even a pint of Guinness. All right, let me just take a look at this poll. So it looks like option A, manual repetitive task, we have 42%. B, rectifying errors, we got 11%. C, data collection and reporting, we have 32%. And D, unskilled, untrained manpower, we got 16%. So thanks for sharing that with us. All right, if we can move over to the next slide. Okay, let's look at some of the factors that create inefficiencies in the hospitality accounting. Some of the issues is the dispersed processes as well as dispersed systems. As many of you know, especially the ones that are working for management companies, you might have a lot of different brands that you run. There's many different PMA systems, and each location is an individual location by itself. So how do you take the data from all these different brands from different PMAs, and how do you bring all that information together into one system and manage all that? So we'll talk about some of that. When we're talking about the hyperautomation, what we're talking about is targeting some highly manual and repetitive processes. So we want to go after things that take up a lot of time and that's low skill. Some of the other challenges are the multiple document formats. There's too many human errors. And how do you deal with unskilled, untrained resources? So one of the challenges facing the industry today is definitely the fact that we've been shut down for a long time, and now it's slowly going to open back up. And as things open up, how do we manage the amount of guests that we're going to have coming in? Are we prepared for them? If everything opens up, overnight, are we going to be able to handle that? So these type of processes that we're talking about is going to help you in a scalability point. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, let me define hyperautomation. So basically what hyperautomation is, it's taking complex processes, it's taking different systems, and it's bringing them together and creating an end-to-end solution. And before I go on to the next one, we got one more poll we'd like to launch. So let's just take a quick 20 seconds or so to conduct this poll. But which one of these statements resonates with your first instinct of hyperautomation? Replacing workers with robots to perform all the tasks. Option B, yet another system that is going to bloat your IT cost. Option C, automating mundane manual tasks across entire process flow. And option D, I really don't know. Okay, it seems like it's leaning heavily towards option C, which is automating mundane and manual tasks. And we have a few people that are selecting yet another system that's going to bloat the IT cost. Okay, if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, let's debunk a few myths about hyperautomation. One of the myths is threat to employment. This could be there in a small capacity, but basically what we're talking about is the ability to free up your human assets to improve job quality and also leverage them to use some more higher leverage items. Another thing that hyperautomation isn't is adding more machine, more hardware, or more software. It works with your existing infrastructure, and it's not something where you have to spend extra cost on the software. It's also something that doesn't cost a fortune to get launched. It's affordable. It's an OpEx model, and we can talk more about that later. And it doesn't require any expertise from daily operations. A lot of our tasks are are highly automated, and they can work in conjunctions with your employees. And it's a very easy system to deploy at your locations. And if you look over to the right, you'll see some of the stats from Gartner on what we're looking at in the near future. So the industry is definitely moving to this, and they predict every enterprise worker to have a robot as an assistant. I think it's going to be probably more than a single one, but it'll definitely help us with all of our work moving forward. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the technologies we use. Um, so the first one is robotic process automation, which is RPA. Everyone's heard of artificial intelligence, and the combination of those two working in hand is what we're talking about is the intelligent process automation. And if we can move forward to the next slide. Okay, let's think of RPA in simple terms. This is more an introductory slide, but you can think of an RPA as mimicking human behavior. So you can think about it as a hand moves over a mouse or a keyboard, and also as an eye trains on a screen. Some of the tasks it can do is fill out forms, it can copy and paste data, it can log in and out of systems. So some of you that are using some older systems, we have the ability to log in and out of any of these systems. It could be an online system. It could be something you have on-prem. We can access files in a document folder on a desktop. We can also get attachments off emails, open up attachments, look at it. So the RPA is the actual manual function of moving around on a keyboard. But there is a shortcoming to the RPA. It can't handle unstructured content. So next, I would like to look at what that looks like. Okay, everyone's seen the tip of the iceberg before. So RPA can handle the tip of the iceberg, and that's about all it can handle. It can work with structured data, and it can move a few things around. But the unstructured data, which is the 80%, so this is part of what we're talking about with hyperautomation, is how do you deal with all this unstructured data? It could be scanned invoices, it could be emails, it could be images, it could be a lot of different forms. It could be in a conversation, and how do you pull out the exact information you need from that? And that's kind of what we're going to go a little bit more into detail with the next slide. Okay, so the RPA is your hands and your eyes. Think of the AI as a cognitive part. That's the human brain part. Obviously, AI is nowhere near what a human brain can process, but it has come a long way in the last several years, and there are a lot of processes that we've worked on. So AI kind of works very similar to a way you would hire an employee. An employee comes in, maybe they have no experience, maybe they have limited experience, but you need to teach them what your process is and how your flow works, the systems you're working in, the different invoices you're looking at. So we've spent the time, and this is the difficult part of the hyperautomation. It's the mental capability of the system that you're using to know exactly what you're processing, how to process it, do it in a timely manner, and doing it where it's consistent and it's 100% accurate. So we've spent the time, we've taken a lot of unstructured data, we've taken a lot of unstructured content, and we've run it through our AI engines, and we train different models. So we'll have different AI bots that'll work on different processes. And when we combine these bots together, they actually work as a human mind would work, and they can handle a lot of complex processes. And the other benefit to you is you can now come into our system, and it doesn't take a lot of data for us to train our engines to work in your system. A lot of times we can get a lot of our clients launched with very minimal to no data on their end, depending on what the process is. Okay, next I'd like to introduce Raghu. He's going to take the call from here.
Yeah. Thanks, Augustine. I think Augustine gave a high-level overview of really how an IPA process works, right? So now let's jump into how it works in the hospitality industry, right? Now, like Augustine mentioned, the hospitality accounting space is a little more complex compared to normal accounting, just given the whole concept of property accounting, how systems work with each other, right? A little archaic industry in terms of, I mean, it's not an industry that sees a lot of money going into technology, particularly on the back office side. You see a lot of money going into automation that's much more front end automation, customer experience side, but not so much money that goes in on the back office side. So you're stuck with a lot of legacy systems, archaic systems, systems that are not talking to each other, right? And then just makes it a lot more complex for the accountant, right? So here are some tasks that we see on the screen here, which are typical activities, typical day in the life of a hospitality accountant, right? Meaning all the way from, meaning an extremely wide array of tasks, right? AP related, AR related, right? General income journal, GL related, bank statement reconciliations, right? And then I have to run MIS reports, right? So there is just a very, very wide variety of tasks that they need to do, right? Now let's take a quick look at which of these tasks we think are really automatable, right? No surprise, right? Pretty much everything is automatable, right? Everything, when we say automatable, doesn't mean that you can just eliminate humans right away, right? But everything has a portion of the task that can be automated, right? And the whole concept of hyperautomation is, so there are three pieces to hyperautomation, right? So one is the process piece, which is identifying the right pieces of the puzzle to automate. The second is the technology, which is the um, IPA, right, which is the RPA with the cognitive brain to be able to drive automation at a much higher level, right? And the third piece is what we call as the human in the loop, right? So rather than looking at saying, okay, hey, which pieces of tasks can be automated fully, you now start looking at a process in entirety and saying which pieces absolutely require a human to perform, which of the pieces are ones that don't really need a human, that are much more mundane, right? Like all of you answered on that poll, we all understand that there is a significant amount of transactions that are that are very, very mundane and can be easily automated, right? So focus on those and have them automated, keep the human in the loop, right? So you know there is right reviews and make the system foolproof. That way you get the best of both worlds in the system, right? So here's, let's take a quick look. We thought it'll be good to pull out an example of someone that's done hyperautomation, right, that we work with, right, and say how they've been able to achieve certain efficiencies, right? So this is a hospitality management company. I mean, they're actually an owner manager, right? So they own as well as manage their own properties, over 100 properties across the states, right? And here's some things that they automated to be able to drive 300% ROI in hyperautomation, right? So first is they automated their accounts payable process, right? Again, there are different ways of automating the accounts payable process, right? Either through a workflow system or sorts. But to just put this things into perspective, this company has been on a very, very large acquisition spree. They continue to be on an acquisition spree through the pandemic as well, right? So they've continued to add a lot of properties, and each of these properties come with slightly different systems that are there. So what they do is they pretty much unify the accounting system, but leave the rest of the systems intact, right? Because they also want to have that flexibility without putting a lot of investment in to move platforms over for every single property, right? But the way the accounts payable system works is there is a complete end-to-end automation. So each property has a mailbox where vendors send in invoices, right? So essentially we have our hyper automation system pulling data from right from the email boxes, again, classifying whether it's an invoice in some cases, vendors could be sending their statements and requesting for payments, right? Even though it's an unmonitored mailbox, they do send that out. So you got to figure out whether it's actually an invoice you're dealing with, or if it's something else, then forward it to the right teams to handle it. And then if it's an invoice, go ahead, pick up the invoice, extract the data from the invoice using the AI, right? Again, in cases where that's the human in the loop system that we talked about, in cases where the AI is not able to extract information from the invoice, pull it through a human eye to validate the extraction. And then once that's done, go and they use Bird Street as their purchase order system. So we go and validate the data. If it's a PO invoice against a PO, then go validate the data for the PO. Once the data is validated against the PO, we go in and enter the data into the accounting system. Right. For cases where the information could not be validated with the PO, we push it through a workflow cycle, and then a human reviews it, approves it before it's pushed into the accounting system. So essentially, we've seen about an 80% reduction in processing costs, right? And obviously a significant reduction in timeline for processing, because pretty much anything that comes into the mailbox sent by the vendors instantly gets processed and then gets pushed into the accounting system. So the turnaround times for any vendor invoice received to get into the system with the human in the loop is less than 24 hours, right? Again, the accounts receivable, this is again a very, very different challenge for certain properties. This may not be a standard for all property managers, again, right, or all owners. But if you are very heavily dependent on OTA billing, you know this pain, right? Essentially, your ability to reconcile and push payments into the OTA systems is a key component of how quickly you are able to recover money from them. So with this client, before they standardized the process and automated this, okay, their AR through OTA channels stood at about 70 days, right? Because there was always a backlog. This is pretty much a low priority task that happens, right? Then you have a lot of daily tasks to take care of. And then there are errors. You submit to OTA systems, right? Like Expedia. Then you see rejections on that, and then you have to correct it, resubmit it. So it's just a painful manual process that happens, right? And then the whole reconciliation of after the receiving the payment or approval, then you go back in and reconcile it with your accounting system, pass the adjustments. So it's just a painful process, which because of which there was a huge backlog. With the automation, obviously there was a significant reduction in manual effort, but the biggest advantage was we were able to bring down the collection time to about 35 days right now. Okay. Again, bank reconciliation is something that we automated with this client, for example. So essentially, it's like, again, a very, very low touch kind of a process, right from logging into the banking system, downloading the statements, all the way to downloading the statements from the accounting system, reconciling cash, card, and all the other transactions, right? So pretty much there are probably anywhere between 5 to 8% of transactions that are not reconcilable automatically. They could sometimes be blocked transactions and so on. And those are the only cases where we'll need help from a human to reconcile. And then the system takes care of pushing the data back into the accounting system. Okay. And then reporting is a task that, again, there's extensive opportunity for automation, right? Pretty much you have data pulled from multiple systems, right? Yeah, particularly if you have a collection of chains, then you know what the pain is, right? There is data from across systems that needs to be pulled and then shown, right? So I mean, there are a lot of other interesting cases that we've done in the reporting space. There's one client of ours that we work with where we look at data against laundry bills at property level compared against daily occupancy rates to see if that is a trend that we see, right? It's in line, or is there a variance, right? So I mean, just the ability to be able to pull data and pull data at will from any source, right? Whether or not you have access to the databases and all that, just gives more power to be able to do a lot of other analysis that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do. Right? Here's a quick example that, well, I mean, we talked through a lot of processes and stuff, right? But we thought it'd be good to just do a little bit of a deep dive into yet another use case that we've executed in the past, right? So this is a property with about 30 odd, I mean, this is a hotel management company with about 30 odd properties, right? We've done manual, they were doing manual income journal entries, right? Again, the process pre-automation was the PMS report was, so they don't have, they're not owners. So properties are across multiple PMS systems, right? So this data was just being downloaded from multiple sources. Some PMS reports come in on email, some PMS reports, you'll have to manually download them. Some come on the shared drive, right? And then you extract the data again. Each PMS system puts out the daily reports in multiple formats, right? They used to bring all of that into one daily revenue report sheet that they wanted to, that's in line with their accounting system. And then they reconcile it, validate it, and then they push the data into the accounting system, right? Now in the automated space, what we pretty much did was the download of the PMS reports was automated. The entry into the DR was automated, right? Reconciliation was also automated, right? And it was pushed into the accounting system, right? And then the whole thing was reviewed and submitted for rollover, right? So pretty much something that took 2 full FTEs of work every day now takes about 2 hours to complete, right? So we have a small video here that we're going to quickly play just to give you a glimpse of how this process works, automated end to end, right? So what you see here is right. The part that you see here is all of the data from the PMS reports pulled into a shared drive. Right. What you see here is a complete automated download of the data from the shared drive. Right. Again, you'll notice that multiple PMS systems have reports in slightly different formats. So as it every single folder has a slightly different structure to it. So again, once the night audit is completed, that's when the system will run. If there is the night audit is not completed for a certain property, then the system will skip that property, make sure it reminds that particular property manager to go ahead and complete the night audit, and then it'll go in and download it again, right? It'll rerun and download the data again. Okay, so once that is done, the data is brought into a standardized spreadsheet. Again, that's in line. The whole idea of the spreadsheet is to bring the data into one format, which can also be reconciled, right? So we've built a lot of foolproof methods in there. For example, we do a total in the DRR. We do a total on the, we'll pick up the total from the report and match them up just to make sure that there are no errors in the extraction and the process, right? So that way we have foolproof mechanisms built in there. In case there is a reconciliation failure, that's the point at which it will be flagged for a human in the loop verification. And once that is done, then the RPA system automatically logs into the accounting system. Again, what you see here is an M3 accounting system, which is a legacy accounting system, right? But it logs in, goes ahead and creates the daily reports and enters the data into the accounting system. Okay. So let's take a quick look at what kind of savings that they were able to see in this case, right? What kind of results that they got, right? Now, there were 2 FTEs pulling this data, bringing the data into the DRRs and pushing that into the accounting system every single day, right? So that's about 4,000 hours of work a year, right? So with the automation, they were able to save about $100,000 in costs, right? And a 600% ROI is what they were able to see with this automation. But more importantly, I think there is this value around 100% faster turnaround time, right? So that's the other beauty of an automated system, that it can do either concurrent processing or processing outside of work hours, right? So most of our processes run outside of work hours, and so pretty much everything that needs to run is ready for the accounting team to act on when they walk into work at 8 a.m. that day, right? So that significantly also improves productivity during the day, right? That they have to only look at ones that need the attention from them and just act on that immediately. So with that, we've kind of come to the end of what we wanted to cover, right? So we do have so if, I mean, we hope that you've been able to catch a glimpse of what hyperautomation will be able to add as a value to your journey, right, into your accounting in the hospitality accounting space, right? We do have, if you're interested in knowing more, please go ahead and shoot the questions. We'd be happy to take a few questions. Now we have about 20 more minutes left on the call, but we can also do an exclusive free consultation for you, right? Where no obligation, we can do a call, right? Set up a couple of hours and then run through some of your process, right? And then kind of give you a roadmap for success, along with kind of a high level project ROI with ability to target some quick wins in that space. So if we have some questions, we can take some questions.
Okay, so thank you, Raghu. Thank you, Augustine. So we have a few questions that have come in, and one of those is a question that they already have an AP software in-house. So we would like to know, like, what hyper automation can add.
Sure. Yeah, I think if you have a standard AP automation software that handles the workflow end to end, right? I think the value that you'll be able to add is look at, hey, what are those piece bottlenecks that are there that are still being handled manually, right? Again, it is quite possible that everything is running end to end, right? So again, this is like Augustine mentioned earlier, the idea of hyper automation is to be able to complement an existing system and not necessarily replace existing systems unless absolutely required, right? This is not another piece of software that just adds to your arsenal and just bloats your IT system, but rather that sits something that sits atop your existing system. So it's like a garnishing that just adds that additional ability to your existing systems.
Okay. So, Raghu, we have one more question from Manny. And the question is, in my previous role, I've used RPA, but did not quite see the ROI that we anticipated. So how do you really anticipate and calculate ROI that you have mentioned here?
Okay, so I think that's a great question because I think the key to that is start with the right process, right? So traditionally we've seen that so it's just general human thinking that you tend to start with the most complex process, right? That you think is okay, this is just really tough for me to handle, so I'm going to go ahead and try and automate that. Maybe that's not the best way to look at this, right? If it's very complex for a human to do, it's as complex for the system to do as well. And then while it doesn't mean that it cannot be automated, it just much more complex to automate. So the best way to address that would be to look at all the process in entirety and then say, hey, which will be a quick win, which will be a process that's not so complex to automate, that's much more mundane, right? And then pick the ones that have the highest ROI and start with that. Again, it's ROI is not only in cost terms, right? ROI is in terms of time, in terms of value, in terms of customer experience, in terms of streamlining processes, in terms of quality to reduce errors, right? So we'll start looking at ROI across the table, across multiple, right, multiple dimensions. And if you're looking for quick ROI, I think the best way to do that is look at your wide array of process, pick up the ones that are quick wins, pick up the ones that are high ROI, and say that's where we want to start and shoot for as we move along. Okay. I have a question that someone shot to me, right? What is the accuracy of the automated process in current scenarios? What would be the optimal number to aim for, right? I'm assuming that this is specifically targeted at the example of the income journal that we talked about, right? So in that case, the accuracy of the automated process. So that process has been running with a customer for almost a year now, right? And the accuracy of that automated process is 100%. Right now, we haven't, while all of the foolproof systems have been built in place, right? That fortunately, touch wood, it hasn't failed a single day since for almost a year now. Every single day, it's done the process with 100%. Right. But that said, will that be an optimal number to aim for? I think anywhere between an 80 to 90% automation that you are able to achieve. Again, not necessarily in terms of accuracy, but in terms of efficiency, right? So there could be multiple reasons why a certain process could not be executed, right? But that is kind of, so in terms of efficiencies, 80 to 90% efficiency is something that will be optimal to shoot for.
Okay. So we certainly welcome many more questions. I'm sure this webinar has been an interesting topic to take on. We have one more question here, Raghu. Eddie asks, how practical is it, especially in today's times when teams are working remote? How efficient and how practical is hyperautomation?
Okay, that's a very, very interesting question because I think most of the automation that we've actually driven has been in the last 1 year through the pandemic when teams were working remotely, right? Now, the complexity is much more not from the implementation of the automation, but the complexity is to be able to bring participants together and help understand the contours of what we want to attempt to automate, right? And the definition of the process itself in terms of what are all the variants, what are the exceptions that we need to look out for, right? And what are the branches within a certain processes. That exactly is the challenge with when the teams are distributed, makes it a little more harder to get that through. But once that is done and we have a clear process map of what needs to be executed, executing and implementing the automation itself is not that difficult. Doesn't matter whether you're sitting physically or remote. But in fact, I think the power of the automation can be better utilized if teams are working remote, because uh, just given that already the basic accounting and hospitality accounting is complex, just adding the remote component to that just makes it a lot more complex.
Okay. So we have one more question here from Randy, and it is about the time that it takes for the implementation and for it to actually start functioning. So how long does it take to implement and start functioning?
So once we have um, clarity on the process, right, and the systems in place, right, I usually we are talking about automation timelines of anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks to drive automation for each process, right? In some process, if it's much more straightforward, if it's something in the lines of what we've already done, for example, they could even be lesser. It could even be 2 weeks. We have done something, but I think the ballpark to achieve an automation end to end will be the ballpark of about 4 to 6 weeks. right? And you're pretty much the day it's implemented and it starts executing, you start seeing ROI from right then.
Okay. And Raghu, what happens if the team is very small? I mean, and the organization is short on hands. How does hyperautomation help and work if they have a very small team to really support the initiative?
Yeah, I think there are two parts to that, right? So one is small, the team being small to be able to support the initiative. Again, I think it's sometimes easier to have a smaller team because you get buy-in faster, right? It's easier to drive changes, change management within the team, and to make some minor process changes to lend itself well for automation, right? So from that standpoint, I think it's an advantage to have a smaller team rather than a larger team, right? But given that, with a smaller team, the different dimension to that is how will I see ROI with a smaller team, right? I think again there the key is to be able to pick the ones with the right um, pick the use cases with the right ROI, right? And also look at it from a slightly longer term standpoint and say, hey, if I free up my existing team, even though it's small, if I free up their valuable time by allowing them to shed mundane activities, what can I get with them, right? So maybe they can start doing some much more deeper analysis towards revenue management kind of goals, right? They can start doing much more deeper analysis on the data to draw inferences, which in turn, like for example, the example that I shared, where the customer wanted to analyze and say, hey, our daily sheets, the laundry on the sheets that I'm spending for cleaning them, is that in line with the kind of occupancies that I'm seeing, right? If not, then where am I losing out, right? If the occupancies and this shows a slightly reverse trend, then obviously there's something that's operationally wrong. So how do I start looking at that kind of data, making those kinds of inferences that will be able to drive operational efficiencies, right? So essentially data in your hands and ability to have more time to look at meaningful data and inferences is a big outcome of saying I'm going to automate some of the mundane tasks, right? Drive that away so that I will have more time, my team will have more time to start focusing on higher value tasks, which can in turn drive further efficiency within the system.
Okay. Hope that answers the question. So Stanley has here a question. So they have a lot of processes, and he is not able to probably think of what to pick first and how to go about automating the many processes that they have. So, what would you say is a way to pick uh, processes when there are too many to think of, Raghu?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, um, the best technique is sometimes gut feel, right? So this is a process that I want to drive, but but more often than not, that's not the right approach to do it, right? Because that's something that we've seen time and again with clients that you pick something that you either is not necessarily the highest ROI, you think that's what you want, but there could be other low hanging fruits that we could go after. So the best is to lay out the different processes that we have, right? And then try and attribute just do a quick time and motion study of sorts with the accounting team and say, hey, okay, I have an AP team. How much time are they spending on mundane tasks that can be automated? I have an AR team. What tasks within that can be there? So then you want to pick a task that has the highest ROI, right? A simple time and motion study of the different tasks being done by the accounting team will get the answer.
Great. So, we welcome many more questions our way, and we'll have Raghu and Augustine answer as
Yeah.
many questions as possible.
I have one question that showed up, right?
Wonderful.
So using the M3 daily you showed in your example, if the M3 daily report changes, how involved is it to retrain the AI in the new format? Also, M3 has an auto load function, but I understand this was just an example of what AI can do. Yeah, that's right. So yes, if the M3 report changes, it is not a very involved process to retrain the AI, right? Again, if the variations are very heavy, then it is. But in normal course, the effort to retrain the AI is not very heavy. I'd say it's again a matter of a few weeks if the report changes, or if there is a new PMS system that needs to be added within the mix, right? Or a completely different report format that needs to be added, right? That's essentially what it is. But it is not very involved, right? I mean, the upfront effort itself is not very heavy, and if the report changes a little bit, it's not. It is not a significant effort to retrain it. Now,
Okay. We have one more question.
again, just to add a little bit, yes, M3 does have an auto load function, right? In this case, we chose to do that because there are 5 different PMS systems, and writing API connections to all of those PMS systems and programming it just becomes a lot more expensive, right? So from an ROI standpoint, implementing the bot is way cheaper than the significant involved development effort to try and do backend integrations.
Great. Thank you, Raghu. Hope that answers the question. So we have one question from an infrastructure standpoint. So what kind of requirements might there be from an infrastructure standpoint? Like would we need additional or special operating system or any other hardware requirements?
Yeah, most operations, again, there could be a few exceptions in there, but most operations do not need any special hardware, right? They can just work like any of your users in existing systems, right? So more often than not, we try to combine bots into fewer systems. That way, as long as they don't have to run concurrently. So the need for, on the RPA front, the need for special infrastructure is very low, right? On the AI front, again, depending on the operation, some of them are not very infrastructure heavy operations. Some of them are. Again, that will vary. That could vary depending on volume of information to be processed. But for the most part, we are not talking about operations that are extremely infrastructure intensive, right? This is not a core banking system that needs real-time movement and all that. So we are talking about very manageable infrastructure, pretty much usually available within a server farm structure.
So we certainly um, request the participants to keep shooting their questions. Feel free to ask any questions that might come to your mind. One question that we do have here is, Raghu, how does someone make sure that the automation is working right? It does not create any mistakes on its own, and how whether it is taking care of the data and reports in the right way?
Okay, so there are 2 parts to how you monitor the system, right? So one is monitoring the working of the automation itself. The other is monitoring whether it's working right? So obviously the classic example we use is if we end up automating a task, right? Then there's nobody else doing the task other than the automated system, right? Other than the digital worker. So what if it suddenly decides not to work today? Right, then that task just completely gets backlogged for the day, right? So from that standpoint, I think that so there is usually a monitoring system also as part of the hyperautomation setup, which reports out on functioning and performance of each of the digital workers that is present in the system, right? But on specifics around whether it's doing the job right or not, again, the key is to build those foolproof mechanisms within the whole system. And if they cannot be built in, right, as completely automated foolproof mechanisms, that's when we try and build the human in the loop, right? So we identify which are ones that can be validated. We identify which are errors that can be caught within the system and reported out, right? So that way we don't let the RPA system or the automated IPA service automatically push wrong data into the system, right? So that is one validation that we built in. But on the other hand, we also make sure that if there is a validation that cannot be built in, then we choose to go with with an option of a human in the loop kind of a system.
Okay, and so the other question, Raghu, is more from an unstructured data standpoint. We did see on the in the presentation about structured and unstructured content. Could you throw some light on that and how IPA is able to work around unstructured data and content?
Yeah, so that's where the AI component comes in, right? Like we had someone ask in one of the questions as well, right? So these are systems that are trained, that are designed to handle unstructured data, right? So essentially, it's the brains, right? So if the RPA is like the hands and the eyes of looking at a system and operating it from an interface standpoint, AI is like the brain, right? So it can handle multiple types of unstructured data. So it could be reading an email, it could be reading an invoice, identifying whether what type of document it is, extracting data from an invoice, from a statement, right? Or looking at a particular flow and saying, hey, I'm training myself to process these steps, and then I can do this on a repeated basis, right? So essentially, it can do a very wide variety of tasks. Again, um, that said, it's not as flexible as a human. So you still need to be able to define what you really need. So when you say unstructured, as long as you know what you're looking for from that document or email or whatever that piece of unstructured content is, the AI will be able to perform that. Looks like there are no more questions.
So yeah, Raghu, we have one more question
Okay.
to go. So how does IPA play its role in the dynamics between the leadership team and the operational team? And how does the operational team convince the leadership team that this is something that will enable them on a day-to-day basis? And what are the common factors that they need to bring in?
Okay. So I think that's so there are two parts to that question, right? So one is I think defining a clear roadmap and an ROI, right? Clearly defining what in multiple dimension terms, right? How this is, so it's not only cost, right? So obviously leadership team is evaluating a solution like this. They're also going to not just look at cost, but in terms of ability, in terms of reliability, in terms of scalability, right? So how do you define your ROI across these multiple factors, right? How do you rate this across multiple factors and say what are my risks and rewards of doing this exercise, and then putting it forth, right? In fact, there is so if you get on our website, we've actually written an article on how do you actually sell hyperautomation to your CFO, right? So now that's a very interesting article where we provide perspectives on how exactly you will be able to package this right to sell it to a leadership team and say, hey, we want to do automation. Here are the pros, here are the cons, but the pros clearly outweigh the cons of going down that path, and that's why we want to go down that path. So again, I think from an operational but what we've also seen is the converse is also true, right? It is sometimes the leadership is bought in that they want to try and do something like this, right? And then it's the job of the leadership to convince the operational teams to start using it. Again, there is change management that is involved, just like any other automation. There is need to convince the users about the positive benefits of bringing an initiative like this. So I think that's where it's key to involve the teams very early on in the process, get them to be champions to drive these automation. And the moment we've seen with a lot of our clients, the thing that we've seen is that once they start doing some automation of their by themselves, right? They're part of that thing and they see the success, then they're much more forthcoming to even unearth processes, areas that otherwise the leadership would not have identified, right? So that's so it's I think from a leadership standpoint, it's just early. We'd say the mantra is early involvement of the operation teams.
Okay, so I think we are around about the end of our time today. It's been a pleasure to have you all on this webinar. As I said earlier at the beginning, we will be sending the slides and the recording of this session to all of you who have attended and to people who have registered. And we thank Augustine and Raghu for some enlightening information about intelligent process automation.
Thank you, Vinay. Thanks, Augustine. And we request you all to provide us some feedback. If you have any more questions, feel free to email us at Raghu at RAGHU, Raghu at rapidautomation.ai. We'd be happy to answer those questions. And if you'd like to have a chat with us, try and understand a little bit more or deep dive a little bit into your process and suggest areas that may be good for you to get started with, feel free to shoot us an email and we'd be happy to jump on a call with you. Right. And as mentioned earlier in the meeting, we will share the slide of slides and the recording with you as well. So you feel free to share it with anyone in your teams that might be interested. Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Augustine.
Thank you, Raghu.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone.